All right, I'm now on page 213, and we're now going to talk about using sends, and I believe this will be somewhat familiar to all of you. We definitely covered some of this in 101, but we'll talk about a few more things here that's pertinent to understanding sends. So first of all, you do need to understand that there are two types of sends, and I already mentioned this prior. But when you're working with the sends menu, you have, of course, the output, which is referring to a physical output of your interface. So if you're planning on sending a signal out of Pro Tools into an external piece of gear, you would obviously utilize some of your physical outputs. Now, your physical outputs, what appears in this menu, obviously has a direct correlation to what you have set up in your output tab of your I/O setup. So this will obviously change depending on what you have set there. And of course you have all of Pro Tools' internal mix buses. Notice how under this output tab, just so you're aware, these italicized outputs mean that they are inactive. They are not actually set up. They are probably from a previous interface that was connected to my computer that is no longer connected to it right now, so it's appearing as italicized. And yellow indicates an active path or something that is already has signal being routed to it. So once you've chosen to either route to an output or a physical output or an internal mix bus, you then go through the process of toggling and working with the level. So for example, if I have a send created here on this channel, I have the floating plugin window that we've seen up to this point, and obviously when you open up a send, it defaults to post fader, and you'll notice that there's a little pre button right here which indicates that you are able to turn on a pre-fader send. However, another thing to note is the fader position. The fader is located at -infinity. And this is a safeguard because if you were to create a send and it would automatically open the window with the level set to unity, for example, you could potentially overload an input. If you are plugging this into an external piece of gear and you haven't taken the proper precautions, well, you could very well blow out an input. So with this set to -infinity, it's set as a safeguard. Now, should you choose to change that, and I can't really think of a situation where you would want to change that, you can toggle that setting in Preferences. And that is found under the Mixing tab. Sends default to -infinity. You can see right there that you can select or deselect that. We're going to keep that selected for now. Okay, on page 216, they go over the four main types of send windows. Depending on what type of creative task you have at hand will obviously have a direct reflection of what type of send you're going to utilize. There are four types of sends, and I'm going to bring them up all here so that we can see them all, just as we see them on page 217 of your textbook. By the way, I'm clicking the target button right now in the send window, which when toggled, when turned off, it allows you to have more than one send window open at a time. So as we can see here, we have our four types of sends. This first send, obviously, is a mono send from a mono track, and I sent it from this mono audio track that I have here, the piano track, and of course I sent it via bus 1, so there's my mono send on my mono track. This is the most common. You'll see, obviously, you're sending a mono signal from a mono track. On the next one to the right, we see a looks like a stereo track. This is a mono send on a stereo track. Notice how there is no pan knob. This is a key component of a dead giveaway that this is a mono send because there's no pan knob. And you'll also notice in between these two here, we have 1 meter for the mono and 2 for the stereo, indicating that it is coming from a stereo track. Moving over here to the right, we see our stereo sends. So this right here is a stereo send on a mono track, or from a mono track. And I sent this from the audio 2 track. This is a mono track by design. However, what's happening here is when I make it a stereo... I'm sorry, did I confuse myself here? This should be a stereo send. Yeah, stereo send on a mono track. What's happening is you're taking a mono signal and you're duplicating it. So Pro Tools actually duplicates the signal to send it out of bus pathways 3 and 4. So you're getting a duplicate signal of a single mono signal. And over here we have our final send window, which is a stereo send on a stereo track. And I sent this from the audio 1 track over here. You can see it's a stereo track, and I am going to bus 5 and 6. There are different creative options for utilizing this. For example, this one right here, if you're sending a mono send from a stereo track, for example, what if you wanted to affect or send only something to one side of a mix? So if you had a left and right mix, for example, what if you wanted to have an effect only affect the left channel of the left and right? You can utilize this and send it to either one. So those are the 4 different types of send windows. I would really recommend keeping these ingrained and in your memory, because there is a question on the exam. I know I've seen it before where you're given a window and it asks you, this is an example of what type of send. And you have to be able to look at these pictures and know which is which. The dead giveaway again is that when you're talking about a mono track, something that originates on a mono track, you have no pan knob, as you can see here. Something that originates on a stereo track, you have the stereo, obviously the pan left and right. So you just want to be familiar with those. Looking at the controls in particular on one of these windows, let's just go through them real quick. This is on, again, on page 217. We have a few things here. First of all, this is the track that the send originates from. This is the target button, which allows you to open up more than one send window at a time. This is the send lane, or the send selector. You can see that I'm using send A right now. This is obviously the pathway itself. So what pathway am I sending this signal to? Bus 1. The follow main pan, I'll talk to you about this in a second when we get to the stereo sends. Pre and post fader toggle. Automation safe, meaning if you write automation, plug-in automation or send automation onto a track, and then you go ahead and write a different parameter, you can turn on automation safe to prevent any previously written automation to be safe so it won't be overwritten, for example. And of course your solo, your mute, and your volume fader. Let me pull up now a stereo send to show you the other buttons here. We have a follow main pan button, which is FMP. What this means is when this is selected, you'll see that the pan knobs become grayed out. And what that indicates is that it is going to reference the track that it came from. So if I change the pan knobs on the track that it came from, for example, audio 1, you can see that by adjusting here, I am adjusting the pan knobs of the send as well. So it's a mirror image. The link pan knobs, this is for maintaining proportion between, for example, a stereo channel. When you move one, the other should move. So for example, if I move one here, notice how it maintains this ratio. I'll unlink them for a second to give a better example. I move here, I move here, linking them. As I move them, they are linked. They move in the same direction. Okay. The inverse pan, this allows you to change the direction of the pan. So left becomes right, right becomes left. Not sure when you would use that, but it's definitely there. and this is talked about on pages 217 and 218. 219, copying and moving sends. If you ever wanted to take one of these sends and move it to a different lane, you can simply click and drag it, and it moves to a different lane on the track. You can also copy sends. If you'd like to have another track send signal to the same pathway, you can simply hold down the Option key and drag. The Option key obviously is the copy key. We've done this many times before. And of course you can change or remove a send by simply bringing up the menu and changing your output at your leisure. And then lastly, once you have created a send, you have to create a return. And down here you'll see that I've created an aux input track where once the signal is sent, for example, via bus 5 and 6, well, let's choose a mono channel. Let's say the piano track. I send my signal out of bus 1 or via bus 1, and I showed you how to do this already on the return. I then have the aux input track's input selector set to the bus, which then basically creates the circle. So signal hits the send, it leaves via this pathway by this amount to whatever return it sees, and it is set to here. Something to note, notice how the sends menu or the sends selectors are underneath the inserts. If you have an insert selected on a track, or inserted on a track, realize that because inserts are pre-fader by default, they will leak into your bus signal. So you have to be aware of this whenever you are adjusting your send, that you realize that, if, for example, if you put a EQ on your insert or via your inserts and you change the character of the track, it's obviously going to be EQ'd prior to going to the bus. So you need to be aware of this. Okay, and a couple more things. Adding internal effects. As you can see on page 221, this allows you to, for example, send signal to a plugin, for example, if I choose delay. Again, you kind of have to follow signal path here. Understand that what's occurring here, since I put a delay, or a dynamic delay on the insert, or on the return, what's occurring is the bus is sending signal. It's going to this track because I've set the input to this track. And since it comes into this track, it enters up at the top, even though the selector's here, and it hits this reverb plugin before moving down to the volume fader. So just so you're aware, this is how you would, for example, share a delay. You would have multiple tracks sending to the same bus. For example, if I set all of these to bus 1, these tracks all have an independent fader that will send a particular signal to whatever bus 1 is plugged into. And bus 1 is plugged into the return here, or the delay. So it's all going to go to the delay. Solo safe mode. I talked about this briefly to you before, but let's say, for example, we have 4 MIDI tracks and we have 1 stereo aux input track. Let's say we have this set as our expand module. And we have each one of these subsequent MIDI tracks going to one of the channels of expand. Solo safe mode allows you to put the plugin channel, or wherever the plugin originates, into a safeguard by command clicking the solo button, meaning that anytime you solo a MIDI track, or one of the tracks that is directly feeding or getting its signal from the track that's solo safe, it will automatically keep the aux input track on and enabled. Otherwise, if you would not have solo safe mode on and you were to simply click solo, it would completely shut off this track, the aux track, and since this track gets its signal from this track, that doesn't help you much. So you have to turn this track in solo safe mode so that when you solo these tracks, this track is still active. The aux track is still active with the plugin on it. Okay, and we'll pick up here with the last part of the lecture using native plugins and master faders.